are not up on the board. Before we get to them, Russ is trying to put me in a sad frame of mind. And I can't help but think of Acts chapter 14 when you're talking. Paul has just been stoned in Acts 14:19. And they drag him out of the city, supposing he's dead. And he hops up and gets back to work. And then in verse 21, he goes about and returns to all the cities he's been through: Lystra, Iconium, Antioch. Confirming the souls of the disciples, exhorting them to continue in the faith. And his message of exhortation is through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. That's a good way of looking at it. All right, let's talk about chapter 13 of Hebrews before we talk about prayer. So, you guys know these are not my prepared lessons. I am absolutely happy to talk to you about these things, and I am happy to talk to you back and forth as we need to. So one of our questions that arose the other day was about the phrase outside the camp in verse 13 of chapter 13. And there was also a question about what the holy place is versus the most holy place in the book of Hebrews. So we'll talk about both of those first before we get to the question about prayer. Can we turn on this light over here? There we go. That will help me make sure that what I'm saying is from here, not from here. Okay, so let's take this discussion of the holy place in verse 11 and being outside the camp in verse 13 in context. He admonishes us in verse 8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And then he starts talking about not being carried away by strange teachings. It's good that the heart be established by grace, not by meats, wherein they that occupied themselves were not profited. Just read that. Verse 9. Just read verse 9.
Lungtang he pina hi kipa om hoi ngala nekding te banga hi kipa om loin hutchibang lam lungkham ten waite aphat tuamna amutuan kiu hi.
Now verse 9 is actually a lead into verse 10.
Changkwana to changsomna kaung kisomahia.
Verse 10 is going to say we have an altar that some people have no right to eat from.
He changsomna ka câu tên là mai tam khát mi đăng tên nét thấy lâu khát mai tam khát cái nhiều thì chị ấy.
So what he's doing in these two verses is he's in verse 9 he's saying the priests of the old law, the people who were following the old law, were not profited by the way they consumed the sacrifices.
Hết chẳng qua na again pen khá thu kun lùi hun laya quay đàn dung suy à thil nét tên khá nét đinh thil nét tên khá băng mà phát tuam pi tuan lo hiu chi again này.
If you are a student of the Old Testament, you will remember that in Leviticus, the priests were allowed to take some of the sacrifice and eat it for themselves.
Leviticus ay mo dung suy khá xem po tên khá thil lak tela ka bang sa hiam khá lakhia amao nek dia ko itheu chomo.
And you will remember that some of those priests are chastised because they did wrongly when they did that in 1 Samuel.
Hoi Samuel akigen ma banga kha khen khat ten kha wai anek ding to ki sa anek na to ki sa kha banga ta hila om na u ma hi khian se ko ma hi.
I believe it was Hophni and Phinehas who would stick the fork in the pot and pull it out before all of the fat had been boiled off.
Hoi te kha toa ani ko kan ta
Omni le
amni Phinehas te khian na to ki sa hi ma.
So he's saying these priests were allowed to consume a sacrifice back, that's what he's saying in verse 9.
Baja he chan ko na hebrew bung son thum chan ko na again ta kha siam puten kha anek thi polu ma hi chi hi.
But the priests under the old law were not getting profited by it.
Hele hoi dan je ka kha siam puten kha bang ma phat tuam na nei tuan lo hiu.
Because everything that's gone before in this book is explaining that what we have now is better.
Aja kha he hebrew pumpin again pen kha tua in lel pen kha man phazwa hi chi nai at chi hi.
So now we get to verse 10. He says, we have an altar that they that serve at the tabernacle don't have any right to eat from.
He again pen kha tu na etena mai tam thak khat ini hi hun pai sa ten kha hi thei lo eten hi thei om ta hi chi hi.
Those old priests could take some of the meat from the sin offerings, from the purification offerings, and eat from them.
Hoi siam pu ma sa ten bel hoi khel thoi na khong te a ke panina bangza hiam kha alep ke ane theiwa.
But it did not actually remove the sin of those priests.
Hele hoi anek je ko kha amau te khel na pen akilamang hi ton kia khel na nek te je ko kha.
In fact, if you know what the book of Hebrews says in chapter 9, it didn't remove the sins of the people for whom that sacrifice was either.
Hoi hebrew bung kon an again kha ake thoi na bol tu te ma ama khel na te le hoi te na lamang siang lo hi dan le the.
It merely rolled them forward in a sense. It was a remembrance.
Hoi kha amau mi kia la hi dan the hiat sak sak na hong hi soi hal mang thila ka bol te ka mo.
So verse 11, he says, the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp.
Pada chang som na khat na gan che san siam pulian penin amun chiang thawa khel na adia alap alut pi zel luang te dai no la halu hi dai no la pola ma halu hi chi kha hi.
So now he's talking about a very specific type of sacrifice in the Old Testament.
Here again pen tak kha ki thoi na tuam big khat pen ge na hi ya ka.
Do you know what that sacrifice is he's talking about there?
Ya sacrifice again kha bang al again kha te feton mat.
It is not the regular daily sin offering.
Hi hoi kha ni tenga khel thoi na pen hi lo hi.
In Leviticus chapter 4, there are prescriptions for a sin offering to purify someone when they have inadvertently sinned.
Leviticus bungli na kami mal malena ithili khel chiang na kha khel thoi na e bol di ni tengai bol the pen again hi mo.
The priests could eat from some of those.
Hoi te ke pan kha ni teng khet thoi na te pan kha siam poten kha amao anek theu um hi.
Turn over to Leviticus chapter 6.
Leviticus bung 9 leng kha.
Because what he says here in Hebrews chapter 13 is they cannot partake of the sacrifice where blood was sprinkled inside the tabernacle.
Leviticus bung na again pen kha. Hoi mun siang tho pen na sisan a the na teu mo wai sa pen chen the lo a chiu hi.
And he is actually referring to the old law in a very specific passage there.
ให้จะกายให้again เป็นขาให้ทุกคนลุยคนหนาไว้ด้านเข้าทักอุตสาห์เป็นเกณฑ์ให้
In Leviticus chapter 6 verse 30,
เลวิติกัสบุงลุกจางส้มทุ่มหนา
actually let's back up a little. Okay, let's start in verse 29.
verse ส้มนี่ละกว่าจางส้มนี่ละกว่าในเรื่องขาภาษาเสียงปูเต็งเต็งินควายอันนี้ดีกว่าฮีเฮียอะฮีเฮียทิลเสียงโทเปนะฮีเขียนาถอยนาเสสันมุนเสียงทวะกิเลมนาโบนาเดียกิฮูปีนาปวนินอาหงกิโตยเป็นเนกดิงฮิกีเมียหาลมังดิงฮี
Verse 29 of Leviticus chapter 6 says the ordinary sin offering the priests are supposed to eat of.
เฮียจังส้มนี่ละกว่าเป็นนิเตงาเขียถอยนาต่างปีเตเป็นเบลอาสาเนกเทไอไม่จมอ
But verse 30 says, no sin offering where blood has been brought into the tent of meeting to make atonement in the holy place shall be eaten. It has to be burned with fire.
เฮียจังส้มทุ่มนามีปีเตียเดียเขียถอยนาเดียห้องกิโตยเสสันเทอาอมเป็นไว้หาลมังทิลัดเป็นคันเนกเทหลอกมอหาลตุ้มดิเจียเฮ
Now keep your finger in Leviticus because we're going to come back to Leviticus.
เฮเลเวติกัสเป็นค่ะอีกว่าเดินดิ้งอ่ะเดินจะเอ็นนอนนี่นะครั
ตัวนักเก็ตเป็นลูกค้ามีเกี่ยวกับสิกาอาการของกิโตยเป็นค่ะเนกเหล่าดิมั้ง
มีปีอาดิเป็น
Okay. Now go back to Hebrews chapter 13 so you see that this is what we're talking about. Hebrews 13, what we just read in verse 11, is talking about what we just saw in Leviticus chapter 6 verse 30.
เฮบรูบงส้มเลทุมจังส้มเลขาตะกิเยนเป็นค่ะตัวเลวิติกัสอิซิมเป็นเนาะบงบุกจังส้มทุมากิเยนเป็นเยนขาให้สีถียังไงพอยขับไปข้างนอกเช่นเดียวพอยมีปีอาดิงอ่ะมั้งมีมันจะถอยนาเดเป็นเน็กเทมีปีปุ่มปีอาเดจะถอยนาเป็นเน็กเท
Hebrews 13:11, if the blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering, it has to be burned, the sacrifice must be burned outside the camp.
นี่พอยอาเกนเป็นค่ะมีปีอาเดจะถอยนาห้องกิโตยเดเป็นค่ะไอ้ไดโนล่ะหาตุ้มดิเจีย
Do you see that he's actually saying the same thing that Leviticus 6:30 said?
พอยจากการเลวิติกัส6:30กิเยนเป็นต้องเก็บบังไง
So now my question is back to you. What sacrifice is that the priests could not eat any of, but instead the entirety of it had to be burned outside the camp?
ไอ้ตัวของตัวที่เป็นโจเสียงพูดเต็นอเนกที่เฮ็ดหลอกไว้จะถอยนาอะพอละมาได้โน่ละหาตุ้มดิจิเป็นกบังกิถอยนาเหี้ยเลยน่าเกี่ยวกับเงินจริงเลย
ดีโลกิโตยนะ
sin offering
It is not just the normal sin offering.
พอยค่ะอะตางเปียแค่ถอยนาเป็นเหี้ยละไว้
Leviticus 4 and Leviticus 6 say they get to eat the normal sin offering portions of it.
เลวิติกัสบุงนี่และบุงกิกนาค่ะอะตางเปียแค่ถอยนาเตเป็นเบลเนกที่เจีย
Leviticus 6:30 says, but there is a specific sacrifice that's a sin offering you cannot eat from.
เลวิติกัสบุงกุกจังส้มทุมนาค่ะหวยกิถอยนาจิขัดเป็นเบลอาสาเนกที่เราหิมเจีย
That's why I turned you to verses 29 and 30 of Leviticus chapter 6.
พอยจากการจังส้มนี่ละกว่านาและจังส้มทุมนังซิมสักเสียก็เฮ
There's a specific sacrifice that breaks that normal rule.
เฮียจะว่ากิถอยนาขัดเป็นค่ะอาดัมเดตกิบังแฮกโลขัดองจิตเจียได้
It's the sacrifice that if you take the blood from and you sprinkle it inside the tabernacle, you may not partake of that sacrifice.
จะว่ากิถอยนาเป็นอาศิสันลาอาหวยมุนเสียงทว่านักเทนานักเทเป็นนักเทเสกเป็นคำว่าหวยอาสาเป็นเนกเทเราหิมดีว่าจีไอ
After you have sacrificed it and sprinkled the blood in the tabernacle, you must take it outside the camp and completely burn it.
หวยค่ะนาฮาลตุนดินหวยกิถอยนาปันค่ะอาศิสันนั่นละดีวะนักเทดีวะอาสาอมไหลติงค่ะอพอลามินะนั่นละดีวะนาฮาลตุนดีวจีไอ
Now, I have given you enough information that and I hope some of you know what specific sacrifice that is.
ไอ้เลยห้อยติงกะเกนนาเกปันขาบังจะถอยนาเป็นเกนเฮียมจิคันนาเทวกะกิงกะตาฮี
What sacrifice gets blood sprinkled in the tabernacle?
บังจะถอยนาเป็นเฮเลยห้อย Tabernacle สงอาสันเทงายเตะ
Let me ask it another way. Do you remember any time that blood is sprinkled inside the tabernacle?
เฮียอุณาเต้นไงตัวนั้นเนี่ยห้อยสันเกล้า Tabernacle สงจะกิเทเป็นข้าบังจะถอยนาอย่างเล่
It's the Day of Atonement sacrifice.
ห้อยขาตัดนั่นเนี่ยจะถอยนาเป็นไง
There are some other sacrifices where it gets sprinkled towards the veil, but what he's talking about there is the Day of Atonement sacrifice.
คุณจะบังสันกิเทนาดังเลจอมคดีง่ายเลยไบเบิลจะนั่นเกนเป็นตะขาตัดนั่นเนี่ยจะถอยนาเป็นไง
So that's what we're talking about when we say those who serve at the old altar don't have any right to eat of that sacrifice.
พอยจะกระตัวเห็บรัวไอซิมเปลี่ยนขมอพอยอันนี้ที่เราว่าจีเปลี่ยนข้าผัดตัวปีเราว่าจีเปลี่ยนข้าตัวเกนเปลี่ยนให้
Even under the old law, they couldn't partake of a Day of Atonement sacrifice.
แค่ทุกคนลุยหุ่นอะไรทุกคนลุยด้านอะไรพอยเปลี่ยนข้าเมาอันนี้ที่เราว่าเฮีย
Okay, so let's pause here and make an observation about the book of Hebrews.
อะไรพอยกันหุ่นสักพอแต่นับเห็บรัวเกนเปลี่ยนเย็นทักดิ้งอ่ะ
You need to know the Day of Atonement sacrifice to fully understand what he's saying in a lot of Hebrews.
แค่ข้าตัดนั่นเนี่ยกิถอยในด้านเปลี่ยนข้าอิทธิเฉียนมาสั่งหมายเห็บรัวอิทธิเฉียนมาดิ้งนะ
In Hebrews chapter 5, when we introduce again this concept of the high priest,
เห็บรัวบุงงานนะข้าเสียงโพเลียนเปลี่ยนตรงตั้งอย่างเย็นเฉียนนี่นะ
and you know in our lessons so far with me, we've been working up to this idea of the high priest.
แค่ตัวอิเล็กชันอะไรเกนเปลี่ยนข้าเสียงโพเลียนเปลี่ยนต้องใส่หลายให้
Remember, that's how he started chapter 3 in this morning's. He's an apostle, chapter 1, and he's a high priest, as he demonstrated he's qualified in chapter 2.
แค่ข้าบางทีด้านเสียงโพเลียนเปลี่ยนห้องจึงเฮียมจิข้าบุงนิ่งให้ในเกนเจียงตา
And at the end of chapter 4, he said, this is the type of high priest that we have.
แค่บุงลิ่งตบละมาข้าหุ่นจะบางเสียงโพเลียนเป็นนี้เจียเกนะ
So when he starts chapter 5, after that magnificent language at the end of chapter 4, he is going to make reference to a sacrifice that priest makes.
ให้เลยบุงงานนะข้าไว้เสียงโพเลียนเป็นนะบางทีบางทีถอยนะห้องเปียเฮียจิข้าบุงงานนะห้องเฮียเจียนแต่ดีไง
And in verse 2, he says, the priest can bear gently with the ignorant and erring because he himself is encompassed with infirmity.
จากนี้บุงงานนะจากนี้นะข้าไว้เต้นอามาเงยเลี้ยงฮาโลนะอัตัวมาอมซามให้เจียคุณบังมาเทโลเดเลล้ำให้เตตุงะจากไอนะอันนี้เทวฮี
In verse 3, he says, because he has infirmity, the human priest is bound for the people and also for himself to make sacrifices.
ว่าจะกระจังทุ่มนะข้าไว้เจ็กตะกินมีเดียดิ้งอาลัดสักบังุนอามาวาดิ้งเงยเลี้ยงเขียนนาเจียกินลานโลเทโลอายุฮี
He makes sin offerings first for himself and then the people.
อามาวาดิ้งนะเขียนถอยนาบอลมาซาวะว่าบ้านมีปีเตเดนาบอลไว้
When does that happen?
บังจิกคนหน้าไว้คุณจะบังกิถอยนาเจียเลี้ยง
This is when my questions start getting easy.
แค่ปันนะครับกระโดดหนาเป็นนาทีเสียงเดียวมั้ง
When does that happen?
บอกว่าอะไรไว้ขบังจิกคนหน้าตรงไงเลย
One day every year.
กลุ่มขาดนี่ขัดเลยล่ะ
The priest goes in and he makes atonement for himself and then for the people.
คอยเสียงผู้เล่นเป็นขาอามาอาดิ้งเลยมีปีเตเดกิถอยนาอันนี้นั่นนี่เป็นเกณฑ์ให้
That is Day of Atonement language.
คอยโจตัดนั่นนี่กิถอยนาเป็นให้
When he refers in chapter 9 to the blood of bulls and goats in verse 14 of chapter 9,
บุงก็จังส้นลีนา again บงป้าเตเบลามเตสิสันอาจิเป็นข้าซอบเสียงเทโลท่านซอบเสียงเทโลสิสันอาจิเป็นข้า
that is a reference to what is happening on the Day of Atonement. Bulls for the priests, goats for the people.
คอยบงตังสิสันเตอาจิถอยนาเป็นค่ะคอยนี่ตรงต่างให้
What he's doing throughout the book of Hebrews is going to the most important sacrifice.
Heya again Hebrew and again pen ka ki thoi na la ka ki thoi na poi mo pen ge na hi
It happens once a year
pa ka kum khata khat ve lo tunga hiya
in which the atonement for the people's sins is made.
mi pi te tat na ni mi pi te tat khyak na dinga ki thoi na ki bo mi pe na hi
And it is that Day of Atonement which would actually even start the Jubilee here.
Quay tat na ni a ki pan kha swa tak na ni lem ki pan nga la hi
When all debts are released.
bat le ba teng teng ngai ta ma om hun
When their inheritance would return to those who were supposed to have received it.
aje kha min ain alo banda ten khamo ain alo te amu ki ni wa hi
When every prisoner is released.
swang ko tang teng teng le kha kya ka om ni hi
When slaves are set free.
swak te kha ai chena zalen na pia ka hi
If there was a Hebrew slave, he was set free on the Jubilee.
Quay Jubilee ho na kha Hebrew swak le sala te khamo swak tak na ke pe je la hi
And by the way, that is what Jesus quotes from when he opens the book in Luke chapter 4 and says, this is fulfilled in your presence this day. The first scripture he reads that we hear about in the synagogue.
Quay sene ko ka Jesu Christ na Luka bungli na Jesu na asim khyak na sak Bible chang pen kha wai thuai chu
He's saying, I am the Jubilee.
he pen wai Jubilee pen ka hi chi hi
And the Jubilee occurred on a Day of Atonement.
Quay Jubilee ki chi pen kha tat na nya ke panom ki pa na hi
And what is Christ for us?
Chris aya di na banga ya le
He is our atonement.
aya dia hon tan pa hi
Jesus is how we get atonement, right?
Jesu Christ tum to ni tan nai nga hi mo
He is our covering for sin.
e kha ama kha aya dia i khet na ti a khu hon khu mang sak tu hi
He is the sacrifice who paid the price for the priests and all the people.
ama kha wai siam pu pa khet na to mi pi te khet na lamang tu pa kha ama a hi
And so when we look at chapter 13, verse 11, you need to understand he is talking about the atonement day sacrifice here.
ta se ka bung som thum na chang som le khat na thui sim che na tat na nia tat na thu pe na hi
The bodies of those beasts whose blood was brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin have to be burned outside the camp.
hoya sam ke toy lu teng teng kha hoi te kha aya dai no la kya ka hau teng di chi pe na hi
So when he says that, he is making the point that even under the old law, if it's a Day of Atonement sacrifice, those priests couldn't eat of the old law sacrifice then.
hoi ja ka he again pen kha thukun lui hun lai tan pha le hoi tat na nia dia sa te kha kin ne thei kwa man ne thei lo wa ko man hoi pe ham phat pi thei lo wa ki hal tu ma hi chi ai
And the priests who actually caused the sacrifice of Jesus in the first century, what had they done with Jesus?
ai le hoya kum zabi khat hun la ya hoi siam pulian ten kha Jesu tunga banga bol wala Jesu tunga banga bol wa thoken na banga bol wala
Had they treated him as a sacrifice with the respect that was supposed to be treated with sacrifices?
ki thoi na za tak taka bol da ni na abol ya
He's the stone that the builders rejected.
ama kha min ade lo la in lam ten ade lo suang ninga pen khai suang an ninga suang pen ai
They rejected him as a sacrifice.
ama kha ki thoi na ding na ade ke wi
So the altar of sacrifice that stood at the physical temple
hoi kha mai tam khovela atak taka no mai tam pen kha ki nahi
he says, verse 10, there's a different altar, right?
hoi ja ka chang som na again pen kha mai tam dang mai tam khat mai tam tuam bi ka chi
The people who serve at that altar at the physical temple in Jerusalem don't have a right to eat of the sacrifice that is our sacrifice.
hoi kha atak taka Jerusalem temple oma mai tam akilan te anek penu hilo eite na anek อันนี้เทโลเป็นนุไว้ตะเกียบังโลเอเตนะอามาเตหิเทโลค่ะหมายตามดังนี้ฮีอาจีเฮ
Because he spent 3 chapters saying our sacrifice is once and for all, right?
อาจจะข้าบุงกาลทุมฮีเลียละค่ะเอ sacrifice เป็นค่ะ please repeat that
With Jesus satisfies all sacrifices.
อย่าไว้คัดเวงI remember ไว้คัดเวอาเดียเซตเด็กดิ้งจะถอยหน้าเป็นเกณฑ์จุ่มบุงทุมตะเกณฑ์ค่ะคัดเวเซตเด็กดิ้งจิตทุกเกณฑ์
So he's a fulfillment of the Day of Atonement sacrifice.
อามาค่ะไว้ตัดนั่นเนี่ยจะถอยหน้าเป็นตามตุนหน้าค่ะอามาอาฮิยา
If they want to stay under the old law,
ทุกคนลุยคนไหลเอาทุกคนลุยคนเอามูลไหลอยู่แล้ว
they can't partake of his sacrifice.
อามาจะถอยหน้าเป็นผมเทโลดีเฮียวเฮ
Because under the old law, you cannot partake of that sacrifice.
อาจจะค่ะทุกคนลุยด้านอมเลงค่ะไว้เป็นค่ะเอ็นเดเทโลดีเฮ
And since they wanted to stay under the old law, they also can't partake of that sacrifice.
ทุกคนลุยด้านอมูลไหลหินาวะค่ะไว้คำว่าอันเทศนายตอนเกวะ
Because they rejected that sacrifice.
อาจจะเขาจะถอยหน้าเป็นค่ะอามาอโนลหินเฮ
Was he sacrificed at the altar at the physical temple in Jerusalem?
อามันค่ะเยซูจะถอยหน้าบอลเป็นค่ะว่าอัตตะกาอินเป็นนะจะถอยหน้าบอลเฮีย
No, he was sacrificed outside the camp.
ไว้เต็มปูสงจะถอยหน้าเป็นเยซูลาเราเองนะอพอลมาจะถอยหน้าเป็นเยซูลาที่โซเฮ
He was literally sacrificed outside the city borders.
อามาค่ะขอปีโนละขอปีพอลมาค่ะจะถอยหน้าเยซูน้องบอลอะไรจุ๊ม
At Golgotha.
กอลกฐา
And what is outside the camp in the arrangement of old Israel of the Israelites as they were marching?
แค่อิสราเอลเตนะไว้อพอลมาอาจิเป็นค่ะตัวอีเกนเป็นอาหิมอจะถอยหน้าเป็นค่ะ
If you go read Numbers chapter 5, Numbers chapter 2, Numbers chapter 5, Numbers 19,
numbers bunga numbers bung som la ko na te sim sia gina
there's an important arrangement of the Israelite camp.
Israel te kem ka hi cha alep dan kha oma
At the very center of the camp is the tabernacle.
wa kem lai lung ta ko khat tabernacle oma biak bu kha
Around that tabernacle, the tribes are encamped.
hoi biak bu kim ve le na Israel nam tuam te mo hi
What stands between the tabernacle and the tribes' encampments?
ai le hoi tabernacle le mi pi te kala bang oma le
The Levites camp in that area.
ha levi te om lai hi mo mi pi te to tabernacle kala kha
Do you know why they are there?
bang dinga levi te ko mi wa le
It is repeated multiple times. They are there to prevent the stranger from approaching the tabernacle.
hoi kha ama ten kha nam dang te mo nam dang ten kha wai tabernacle pen anai thei on di wa ama kha aven bit tu hi mo ka chung le vi te kha
And it is specifically to protect the seat where the glory of God is.
abik takina pathian lal tut pha om na pathian pathian mai tam om na pen kha hoi pen kha aven bit tu hi
So if someone who is not supposed to approach tries to approach the tabernacle, the Levites are supposed to kill them.
hoi ja ka hoi mu na lu lo de te pen anu som te te le vi te na ma ke tha di me
So the camp is arranged with God's dwelling in the center, a protective ring, then the people, then outside the camp.
hoi ja ka kha tabernacle tua kem ke ren san kha alai ta ka kha tabernacle mun siam tho me na abana levi te abana mi pi te phola ma kha dai no lum son lai he
And who is outside the camp?
ai la ko te kha dai no la ma ong le kem phola ma ko ong le
Is that just non-Israelites that's outside the camp?
Israel te kha ya wai phola mun te kha
Do you know who is outside the camp?
are they the Gentiles Gentiles are not there no
The Gentiles are further outside the camp.
Gentile te le tuan lo mo le kem phola ma chi te kha ko te ge na ya chang dong he
Outside the camp,
kem phola ma kha
Numbers chapter 5, verses 1 through 4.
numbers bunga na akha
Numbers 5,
Numbers 5
1 through 4.
จังคับวันจังลีนะคะ
Outside the camp in verse 2 is every leper.
จังงานนักอิสราเอลส่วนเตะอาเกียนามุนาคิปันผักเต็งๆเละสิปอเต็งๆเละ
Is everyone who has an issue, like an issue of blood.
เฮ้ยค่ะหนูไม่เต็งงี้นะหม้ออันนี้หลายเตะบังไอ้เกลมิสิเสียกับบัวเปียกมาเตะบัง
And everybody who is unclean by the dead.
มิสิเสียกับมิสิรวมกับขักเสียกับนินเตะมั้ง
And they are outside the camp, verse 3, so that they don't defile the tabernacle where he dwells.
เกมพลมันเตะขาหม้ออามาเตะนะ Tabernacle เป็นอาสุนินเดียวค่ะเกมพลมันกี่คนหม้อก็เฮียมาค่ะ
So outside the camp is treated as unclean.
เพราะจะเกมพลมาเตะค่ะจู่มิเสียงโลกเตะจีนายจู่
It's where everybody affected by the world is.
โคเวลมีเตะนะสุนิเตียวเย็นนายจู่
That's what Leviticus chapter 14 is about, is the leprosy is being affected by the world.
เพราะค่ะเลวิติกัสส้มเลลีนะเกมเป็นค่ะแค่ผักเตะบังค่ะโคเวลมีเตะสุนิด้านนักที่เกนไอ้
It's where the dead are.
เพราะค่ะมิสิเตียวนาเฮีย
Because it's supposed to be removed from his presence in the center of the camp, in the tabernacle, specifically in the most holy place.
อาจจะค่ะอามาเต้นเขาให้มุนเสียงเขาเขามุนในที่เราเห็นเสียคนละ
And let me see if I want to do one more. Hold on. I want to read what I've got to. Chapter 19 of Numbers, verse 13.
บุงส้มเล็กกว่าทำส้มเล็กทุ่มนาเลวิติกัส
Whoever touches a dead person, the body of a man that has died, and doesn't purify himself, defiles the tabernacle of Jehovah and shall be cut off.
ตัวบุงส้มเล็กกว่านาเกนเป็นฮักกว่าเปียวมิสิลวงคอยขาเป็นขาเสียงเราคอยฮีดิงะอามันขาคอยเบียกบุกเป็นอาฮิบัวเทกีดิงเจีย
So Hebrews chapter 13, verse 13 is about going outside the camp.
เฮ้ยบุงส้มเล็กทุ่มจังส้มเล็กทุ่มนาขาไปเกมพลมาไปนาทูเกียนเฮีย
He has talked about this as a Day of Atonement sacrifice.
เพราะบ้านเฮียนี่เป็นขาตับนันนี่ก็ถอยนาเป็นเฮียเจียเกียนะ
He says the priests of that old law don't get to partake of it.
เพราะทุกคนเลยด้านอะไรค่ะเสียงโปรตีนว่าค่ะบางมาอันนี้ที่เกี่ยวเจีย
Because if it was conducted under the old law, it was a Day of Atonement sacrifice and they can't eat of it.
เพราะทุกคนเลยด้านอะไรค่ะไว้เนี่ยที่รักเด็กคนนี้ที่เราเจียเฮีย
If it was under the old law, Jesus crucified outside the camp, what have they done to him?
ทุกคนเลยด้านดงจุยเลยค่ะเยซูคริสต์เป็นค่ะพลมากิคิลลุไม่ไปมั้ง
They haven't treated him as holy.
เสียงเราด้านก็อีเจียไปจุด
They killed him outside the camp,
พลมาอัฐเสียเจียบุค่ะเสียงเราด้านก็อีเจียไปจุด
calling him impure,
มีเสียงเราจีเจียก็
reproaching him,
อามาขัดเกณฑ์เสียวะ
treating him as nothing other than a dead body.
มิสิลวงดังตุกาอากิไว้จุดมั่วเยซูค่ะ
They have no right to partake of the benefit of the Day of Atonement sacrifice, even under the old law.
ทุกคนลุยหุ่นลายด้านอะไรอามาเต้นบางมาอันนี้ที่เกี่ยววะ
But they reject that sacrifice altogether because they want to hang on to the old law.
หอยจะถอยนาเป็นค่ะอามาค่ะทุกคนลุยหุ่นลายด้านน่ะโอ้มุดเจียคนน่ะเฮ้ยหุ่นลายด้านน่ะเลยค่ะหอยเป็นอามาโนขินหลายหิว
But what did Jesus do with the priesthood in chapter 7 of Hebrews?
เรื่องเยซูค่ะเสียงผู้เลี้ยงเอานี่นะคะอามันบางหนาวเสียมสตาร์เลย
He replaced it with a better priesthood.
อามันค่ะเสียงบดด้านทักของปันตาย
And when the priesthood changed, what had to change?
เสียงบดด้านของกิเตนตะกาของกิเค้กตะกาของกิเค้กอะไร
The law had to change,
ด่าน
chapter 7
ด่าน
says.
ผู้เค้กไงตาย
And what did Jesus nail to the cross?
เยซูนะบางอะไรอักกิลเดนข้าครอสะ
Our sins and the old law.
อีเขียนนาเตเลด่านค่ะ
And what happens when he dies on the cross? What happens in the tabernacle?
เยซูคริสต์ครอสอาศิหุนเกียขาตับเนกุลสุมาบังมาเล
The veil is rent.
ไว้ปวนจักค่ะเกตาเฮ
And to borrow an image from the book of Ezekiel, what happens to the seat where the glory of God dwells.
Hoya Ezekiel ay mu dana kha seat or
Seat. That the physical temple is no longer where the glory is.
Hoya at mu thea om pen muna kha mu thea om pen muna kha thupi na om no lo wa hi.
Chapter 9 of the book of Hebrews starts talking about the true tabernacle.
Hebrew bung kwa na kha biak buk tak pen kha dik tak pen kha ge nom non ta.
The physical temple in the middle of Jerusalem is no longer the seat where you meet God.
Hoya Jerusalem lai lunga hoi temple pen kha pathian om na mun hinol lo wa hi.
Because we have a true tabernacle that is above.
Aja etena biak buk khotalam lo biak buk tunglam ai ta hi.
In a sense, what you need to see is the glory of God has left the temple, like in Ezekiel.
Hondan Ezekiel again pen kha hoi temple tak taka na kilam temple pen kha pathian thupi na om nom ke pathian thupi nan hoi tai san ta hi.
And the true temple is above now.
Hoya biak buk dik tak pen kha tunglam om ta hi.
And where is it? It's outside the camp in the eyes of those priests who crucified him.
Ai le hoi kha siampulian pen Jesu kil den tengai to na kha hoi pen kha apolama kem polama om ta hi chi athiu hi.
Because they treated the blood of Christ with which we were purchased as an unclean thing.
Azia ka wai siamputen kha Jesu Christ sesan pen kha asyang laudana ako isyak wahi.
So what's going on here in chapter 13 is he's saying, we have a different altar.
Bungsong na thum na ka ete na mai tam tuam dangini.
It's not the physical altar that is in the middle of Jerusalem.
Jerusalem lai lunga hoi mai tam pen ge na hinom ke ya.
The people who serve there can't actually partake of the Day of Atonement sacrifice that we know is the true Day of Atonement sacrifice.
Hoi nia siamputen tan nia siamputen kha hoi halmang thilat apan bang ma phat tuam pi ane keu chi gen ta.
If we were under the old law, they couldn't partake of it because it's a Day of Atonement sacrifice.
Thukun lu hin lai dan om leng kha hoi ham phat pi bang ma ine ke ding.
But in fact, the law has changed, and He's our true sacrifice, and we need to go to Him.
Hele thukun lu dan pen dan thaka hek ta hi na kha. Tuna ama kianga ipai ngai ta hi zo hi.
Go outside the camp with Him, which man sees as a reproach.
Eten bel tua kha hoi apolama om pen kha ina idi hi ta hi.
Because they see Him as a mere dead body.
Thukun lui mi ten kha hoya misilwang banga angai tua pen kha en inzok ding zo ta hi.
What do we see Him as?
En bang chibagina imudi le ma kha.
Not impure,
Asyang lo dan yen non ke dinga
not a dead body,
misi dan ne ko ke dinga
but a resurrected King.
athonon kumpi dan na ipom de.
That's the point that he's making with this imagery. Jesus is our Day of Atonement.
Hoi ja ka he again pen kha Jesu Christ pen kha tat nan ni a pen kha hi.
And they rejected it.
Hoi ka amau te adik lo pen wa he.
And he's saying to these people, in your walk while it is today,
Hoi again pen kha tu ni chi lai na semun chi ta he.
don't go back into the camp of the old law. Go outside the city and be where our Day of Atonement is.
Thukun lui dan ni na hoi kem sunga pai no lo ina kem polama pe na pai so taun chi na he.
The physical city is not it anymore.
Hoi a khopi tak pen kha atak tak hi mo lo wa he.
We have a true city, a new heavens, and a new earth.
Eten ha khopi thak van thak le thak atua mene ta he.
Don't go back to the old law, is what he's saying.
Thukun lu kit non kiu na chi na he.
Now the question about what this means that it's the holy place versus the most holy place in verse 11.
Hoi ja ka he mun siang thole mun siang tho pen chi to ke sa kha.
Just turn over to Leviticus chapter 16.
Leviticus bung som le ko kha ki leng kha.
Every bit of this is about the Day of Atonement.
He to ke sa ya akigen te pen kha tat nan ni thu to ke sa hi se ka hi.
So some people read this passage and they think, why does he talk about the inside the veil being the holy place instead of calling it the most holy place?
Hoi ja ka ken kha te ni sim che gina hoi ya gim lim hal na pen khamo gim lim hal na to ke sai kha mun siang tho pen ya mun siang tho pen na om hia chi pen khamo
It's very simple.
hoa kha bang je khat ve changa kha mun siang tho pen om da na ki gen sek na kya chi kha ong hil chen te
The author of Hebrews knows his Old Testament.
kaya Hebrew lai ya tuina tum le thei ma
The author of Hebrews is using the exact language that is used in Leviticus 16.
Leviticus bung som legup a ti gen pen kha aman hong hil son hong hil chen zoi
Leviticus 16 is the chapter that talks about the Day of Atonement.
Leviticus bung som legup na kha tak nan ni a to ke sai hi
And since the author of Hebrews is talking about the Day of Atonement, he is going to talk about it the way that chapter talks about it.
hai ja ka Hebrew gel tuina hai gen che gena Leviticus bung som legup nia tak nan ya thil tung da na again ngai hi
So if you're in Leviticus chapter 16, look at the beginning of the chapter.
Leviticus bung som legup chan thak nai le han
Verse 2, Jehovah said to Moses, "Speak to Aaron your brother that he not come at all times into the holy place within the veil."
to pan mo si kya nga na una oran ho pin la pon jak sung mun siang thowa bom tunga zangai na tut pha ma chik lai pe un leng hong lut hen
Which is before the mercy seat, which is upon the ark, that he die not, for I will appear upon the cloud in the mercy seat.
pai tu bom tunga zangai na tut pha ma chik lai pe un leng hong lut hen chi ya again pe phong let me explain a bit
Yeah.
here again pen ta kha here mercy seat om nai chia zangai na tut pha om na pen kha mun siang tho chi chuma mun siang tho pen je ton lo mun siang tho chi ye nei chu
In Leviticus chapter 16, the place where the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat are is simply called the holy place.
hoi ja ka he kong hil chen cho bung som le buk na pen kha hoi pa thian bom om na en mun siang tho pen ichi se pen he bung he chan kha mun siang tho chi le
Exodus uses the language holy place for the outer chamber and most holy place for the inner chamber because they're building the tabernacle there.
Exodus sa ki gel na pen bel apin dan khat na pen mun siang tho chi ani na pen mun siang tho pen cha na het mo a je kha in sung khat le avec ka bil in sung khat om khom bel hi ve wa ngiam ka
So in the instructions for building it, the instructions are emphasizing you're getting closer and closer to God. It's holier the more you get there.
Hi hoya ala gel tuina ai ke le hoi ai in lam te na hon lak de chmo mun siang thom dinga mun siang tho pen pe ram ding cho he na pai lu de do le siang tho de do he chi hon ta la ru na sia ka hi
But Leviticus chapter 16, talking about how they use the tabernacle, simply uses the word holy place because that is the holy place where God appears.
le Leviticus na gen siang a kha pa thian om na hi sia ka kha pa thian om na pe ma kha mun siang tho cha kha gen me hi
I encourage you to read Leviticus 16 to check this for yourself.
he kha Leviticus 16 pen no anak sim leo chen khoi ding ai
What you will see in the regulations for the Day of Atonement is that with respect to that sacrifice, the most holy place is simply called the holy place.
hoi ja ka tat na ni a to ke sai ki gen che gina mun siang tho pen ni chi pen kha mun siang tho chi la ki gen ding ai
Then
The outer chamber is called, the outer chamber with the holy place, most holy place, is simply called the tent of meeting.
hoi ya mun siang tho pen chi pen kha le ki khop da mun siang tho chi a ge na um le ding ai
And then you have the altar of sacrifice
hoi ya kha
outside the tent is the altar of sacrifice.
hoi mai tam ki thoi na pen kha apola mom che le ding ai
The Hebrew writer is simply using the language that is used in the Day of Atonement regulations.
hoi ja ka Hebrew na gen changa kha he tat na ni a thil om aki gen da na ha gen hi ai
When he says holy place, he means most holy place because that's what Leviticus chapter 16 means.
hoi ja ka mun siang tho le mun siang tho pen na chi pen khamo hoi kha Leviticus na akibang da
Ai le.
hong gen che ai
dan cho
in English this
then means the golden altar is in the most holy place, and in actually according to Leviticus it is called the holy place. Is it like this?
Yes, if this were up here, I would draw it. Pretend that I have.
Yeah.
Pretend I'm drawing. Um,
Thế là đang cái này thì phát ngồi thì đều có
Cái khởi thêm.
thế bằng khắc tiền khá với dìm lim dìm nằm thì tiền khá mò muốn sang thầu tiền ông nhá muốn sang thầu tiền ông nhá chỉ thay cho cái đoạn khá coi thì lại một cái nào anh đại cái metro tiền ai không à
Khao, quay cái tuổi là khao những thằng tôi.
After Robinson's should be here. This is the most holy place.
That's-
We are trying to be.
yes. Okay. And then we've got this, right? And then we've got altar of fire. And then we have the laver of the sea. Okay? So, we're going to do it with two colors. Okay? This is the temple complex.
Các temple complex phải hệ mà temple sùng phải này.
This is the curtain that's around the courtyard.
Nhà cả đại tuam nào phải này mà đại phải này.
That's fire. This is the altar of sacrifice.
Hay tiếp phá lăng thì các cái bộ nó muốn phải này.
That's the great sea where they had to wash before they would go into the tabernacle.
Hay các tùy quảng mà cái sự sáng riêng là phải này.
This is what let's see. This is smoke going up. That's the altar of incense.
Hay phải này tụi này điên điên phải khám rồi hay kim nằm thì hao là phải cả.
So fire, incense. The actual altar of sacrifice is outside.
Hay sẽ cái cái thôi nãy các phải này sung hay bao làm mà.
And we have the veil that separates the two chambers inside the tabernacle.
Nghe các quân gia có mà muốn sang thầu là sang thầu phải này chỉ sang cả.
If you read really carefully, there may also be a screen there.
Hayว่าเนี่ยสกรีนนั่งขัดออนไลน์ให้
คนบักใส่เต็มก็ยาว
And this is Ark of the Covenant.
แค่เป็นครับว่าเทียนโบไม่จีเป็นนะฮะ
Circle is the mercy seat.
แค่คามาร์ซีจะเป็นตุดผ่านเลยเอามา
These are the the two cherubim extending over it, just so you know what's there.
แค่ค่ะเจอร์บิมนี่นะตัวเป็น
Now my real question is, according to Hebrew, no?
Yes.
In the second, behind
Yes.
the second curtain, was the second section called the most holy place.
Yes.
Having the golden altar.
Yes. So I'm getting there.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
are in chapter 9.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to finish right there.
Okay.
I want to explain this, then I want to take you there and show you he's saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Okay? So, Exodus will refer to this. Exodus says this is the most holy place. Okay?
แค่คำว่า holy place มั้งมันเสียงเขาเป็นนะฮะ
And Exodus refers to this as the holy place.
Exodus นึงก็ให้มันเป็นขามันเสียงทวจีฮะ
Right?
ดิมั้ง
Leviticus 16
นี่เลยเลวิติกัสของส้มเลยบุกินขา
refers to this as the holy place.
เลวิติกัสนี่ให้ขามันเสียงทวจีเจให้ให้มันเสียงทวเป็นนี่สิมั้ง
And it refers to this whole tent as the tent of meeting.
แต่ครับจมูกตัวนาวันซักอาจจะขาดให้ติ่งๆแค่นี้ใช่ไหม
If you read Leviticus 16:2, it's very clear when it says holy place, it means this room, right? How do I know that? Go read Leviticus 16:2.
Leviticus bung ni na pen an thak leo chen.
Look at Leviticus 16:2. It calls the room the most holy place. What is in it?
Leviticus bung ni na kha wai mun siang tho
Tunga
su
chin
kham
na
kham
tut
le.
pha mo mercy
Mercy
seat.
seat.
It calls the room with the mercy seat
is in the holy place.
the holy place. It says where you go in here and you bring the censer in and you put the coals in so that the incense covers the ark. It calls that the holy place. Am I right? That's what it says, right? I'm talking about Leviticus 16.
Leviticus bung som lo na kien da na mo.
I'm not reading it to you. You read it. When Leviticus 16 uses the words holy place, it says, I'm talking about the place where the mercy seat is. Hebrews 13 is talking about the Day of Atonement and going in and making those sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16 is talking about the Day of Atonement and making those sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. So,
Wai tat na ni a thil tung te kha Leviticus an som lo na kien hi.
Leviticus 16 is not concerned about what happens in here.
Hai Leviticus bung som lo kien again he thil hi te pen gen khalo he mo. He te ko sa gen khalo he.
Leviticus 16 is saying, this is really, really special. Don't go in there all the time.
Leviticus som lo na gen pen he pen kha poi mo pen hi mo. He te ting kha ki the mo bol pa hi.
So the only thing you need to know about this whole tent is that that's the tent of meeting. That's the way Leviticus 16 refers to it.
He ha ki mu pi na puan ni na chi kha abe ka gen khan me.
But this is holy.
Ni he pen kha siam tho hi a.
So the emphasis is on this place in Leviticus 16.
Hai ja ka Leviticus 16 again pen kha he.
Even though it doesn't call it the Holy of Holies, it is the holy place for purposes of that chapter.
Leviticus bung som lo kha mun ai gen da mun siam tho pen chi se lo hi mo.
Because it's treating this outer chamber not quite as common, but it is more common to them because they can go in there daily.
He pen pen ni te na lu the mo he kha kum kha ta khat ve la le na kha.
What does holy mean?
Siam tho chi kha bang gen na he le.
Separated.
Ti hen chi na chu.
This is the place that is separated even for the priests.
Siam pu te a dia siam pu te le alu the lo ki hen na mo pa hen ka ki hen nau. Ki dai dan nau ma he.
Exodus distinguishes between the two places because it's saying this is how you build it.
Exodus sa pen bel ai lam dina na gen je ka kha mo cha hen se ti thoi.
But when you're talking about the Day of Atonement, the only place that matters that it's holy is this one.
Le tat na ni gen se ge na he pen ya gen se ka he.
And that's why the Hebrew writer in chapter 13 just calls it the holy place, because Leviticus 16 just calls it the holy
Hebrew bung
place.
som lo tu na he again je ka kha mo ai gen he.
Now my brother asks a good question. Wait a minute, Hebrews in chapter 9 uses the phrase most holy place. What's up with that?
Hai le Hebrew bung ko na kha mun sang tho pen na chi pen kha bang gen nai ta di le.
You were much more articulate than that. You did not say what's up with that.
So
let's look at Hebrews chapter 9. He's talking about verse 2, there was a tabernacle prepared. So he's talking, in verse 1 we see he's talking about the divine ordinance of services with the sanctuary, and he's using the language of Exodus. When we're building this place, when we're preparing it,
He bung ko na gen pen kha Exodus sa ki gen hoi biak buk alam tu wa thil pai dam te kha mo avan zat teng teng khang gen ma sai chang ni na kha.
he describes the two chambers and he says there's this first chamber which is called a holy place.
Kaya mun masa tha mun siang tho pen hong gen ma.
And he says then there is after the veil, right? There's another one.
He quân giác bà là khả năng lại chi nào.
And this is verse 3 of Hebrews 9:3. After that, after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the Holy of Holies.
Quân giác nghĩ là ba là biết bốc muốn xem thâu bền hạt chịu đâu nè.
So to your point, Hebrews in chapter 9 says, this is the most holy place or the Holy of Holies.
Rồi bùng qua là khai khá muốn xem thâu bền hạt chịu vậy.
You're right, he says that because he's talking about when they were preparing the tabernacle.
Sẽ khác biết bốc làm tung hòa kiến này sẽ cái này.
He's talking about the pattern that they were to build it in.
Nè biết cái bốc làm đi đàn tắc khawai mà hè.
But look in the same chapter.
Cái khawai bùng mà anh non lén.
Look down at verse 6.
Chẳng bốc này anh lẽ hám.
The priests go into the first tabernacle or the first chamber daily. Verse 6.
Xem putte khani te gena e akhat na pindan khat na lu jelwa.
Do you see that?
Kai na mo ya.
The language that he just used, what would that be called?
Ni hoi ka thuma na kin dan.
If he was still using the language of verse 2, it would be called the holy place.
Hoi chang ni na dum se kha mun siam tho chi pe nei pa kem na se min biak bu to masaka alu jelu hi chi pe.
But he changes his language here.
Ka ka thuma pe nong khek na ma.
Watch this. Verse 6, he says they go into this room daily.
He chang buk na kha oya alu gi geu che he pau gi geu che pe kam ke ma.
Then verse 7, he says they only go into the second room beyond the veil
Chan sa gi na kha pindang na nung pe na bel.
once a year.
Kum teng na khat ve chi ta he.
What day of the year is that?
Maka bang ni ya le.
It's the Day of Atonement.
Maka tat na ni he.
We know he's talking about going into this room because it's only once a year and that's what the Day of Atonement was, right?
Nya kha ni khat ve kum khat ve le lu theng na hi na kha kha.
On which day?
So what does he call this place now in verse 8?
Hai le chang yen na he mun pen kha bang chi na hong yen ta le.
The place they only go into once a year is called in verse 8 what?
Holy place. Just holy place.
Holiest of all.
In verse 8?
Yeah.
Yes, most holy place.
Verse 8,
No, it doesn't say in mine. It just say holy place.
right? Let's be careful. We do have translation issues, so this might be. The words in verse 8 are now simply holy place.
Chang yen na kha mun siam tho chi le le chu pen chi kha lo mo.
Benson, you're going to cause translation issues for me again, aren't you?
Yeah, it says here, most holy place in my translation. It's fine.
What does yours say?
NKJV lemon siam thau pe.
The holiest of all.
The holiest.
Holiest.
Ipa wasu.
Holy place.
What does yours say?
Mine
Mun
just
siam
just
tho, holy place.
Okay. Do you all have different versions? Like I've got different versions here?
Yeah.
Yeah, some are translated from KJV.
Mun siam thau pe.
Okay.
On which day do they enter in the most holy place once in a year?
Once a year,
On
they
which
enter
day?
Huh?
On which weekday?
On which month?
On which weekday?
On which weekday?
Among the 7 days of a week. On which day? In the Saturday?
Now
or
hold on.
On Monday?
It is on a given day of the month. It is not. So I could tell you that if I knew the year.
Not your day.
I understand. What I'm saying is I can't tell you the specific day because it is a day of the year. I mean, it's a day of the month, which will change.
Hay là
Các lúc calendar kha kum te na mo. Ni ki ba.
An còn quy nó níu nhá. Vì so
Kung
bằng
makakapay.
Is it during the day of feast?
It's a feast day.
Feast day.
Hold on.
Quay nhỉ.
Let's see. That's going to be in. Hold on. Where are those
I
feast
think we are
days?
going outside the subject.
I will answer you in a minute.
It's okay.
Okay, so your passage actually in verse 8 is saying most holy place?
Holy place.
It's just a holy place in both of our versions. Yeah.
In both of your versions, it's just holy place.
Yeah, maybe from NIV or.
Okay.
What's your? Is it?
I'm the American Standard.
Okay.
Vậy vậy cái version này về
Here's-
mun siam thau pe chưa.
As a KJV chứ, đúng không?
All right, so let me tell you. Hold on. I'm going to look at it in Greek.
Okay.
Hebrews.
ตายเลย
So I have one question for you. A diagram is drawn. Chang, I'm not getting mine. So this is the true diagram. Because you used to draw this diagram always.
Why dan nagigil mo ah? Ile to Hebrew ay sim diyan ka. Why pe non swan lun ma wa mo most holy place ah? Why to confusing ma ha?
It simply says the way into the holies is not open while the first temple is standing, while the first tabernacle is standing. It's in the Greek. It's simply holy. It's not most holy.
Greek ka holy. Del chia he. Mun siang thau del chia he.
So what I want you to see, even if you don't believe the Greek, is what I told you at first. If we're talking about the Day of Atonement, where does he go in?
Most holy place.
He goes in the most holy place. What does Leviticus 16 call that?
Holy place.
The holy place. So when in Hebrews it's talking about doing something in the holy place on the Day of Atonement, it's not disagreeing. It's using the language from Leviticus.
Chang tam chi mai ni mo.
Does that mean the golden altar was shifted on the Day of Atonement to the most holy place?
The altar of incense?
Yeah, the altar of incense is in the holy place, and is it shifted to the most holy place in the Day of Atonement?
He takes coals and puts them in a censer and wafts it in. If you read it, it's Leviticus 16. Are you asking if they move? They actually physically move the.
No.
Leviticus 16 speaks of him having a censer. Let's see.
Altar pen kita mai dia. Kita tuan lo dia mo. 16.
I'm looking for where it is. Verse 12 of 16, he shall take a censer full of coals of fire from off of the altar before Jehovah, and his handful of sweet incense beaten and small, and bring it within the veil. It is the incense, not the altar itself.
Is that the reason why Paul, the writer of Hebrew, included the golden altar is in the holy place?
I'm not understanding that question. The purpose of that is to shield the priest who comes in from the unadorned glory of God. It says that he's not in the presence of God without the covering of the incense.
So does that mean which you read? Are they taking this? Are the high priest taking this incense and bringing inside here?
I believe that's what's happening there. They're taking it from the altar of incense and using that.
Why ka believe siya mo?
Here give me line.
Chi hile. Why mga sensor ka gimlimahon toy zel siya ka mo? Why golden altar pen ka incense altar pen ka most holy place umdana Hebrew writer pen inon present idea am cheju ko question ta.
What is he saying is happening with this that we're trying to figure out?
Thus, the Hebrew writer means that on the Day of Atonement, this altar of incense has been taken inside here.
From the portion that we're reading, I don't believe that's what's happening. He's taking incense from there.
Tua kamo altar abeka kak kiswan lu tuan helo na hoya gimlim pe naman lakuam se na mo lakhe tua mena Day of Atonement na huja ka gimlim pe mo.
Where are you seeing in Hebrews that he actually moves the altar?
No, I don't say that it is moved, but here in 9, Hebrew 9, verse 3 and verse 4, no? In verse 3, it says that it is the most holy place.
Yes.
And what is inside, it described in verse 4, and it says the golden altar is in the most holy place. according to mine.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
đã cái gìn ngay là chỉ mấy nên thế lại cái cái tên là dùng này kiểu không nào bay lặn đi nào không
I don't know exactly how to answer you.
Okay, okay, it's fine.
Can I say I don't know?
Yeah, no problem.
I suspect
Yeah.
that even though it sits outside, because we see it sitting outside,
Yeah.
it belongs to the inner
Yeah.
sanctuary. It belongs to the Holy of Holies.
so
Yeah.
will it have any significance whether it is in the holy place or most holy place, or is there any other application to be drawn from
Good
it?
question.
Is there any significance from your point of view if
If it's in or
if
out.
the incense is inside the most holy place? Will it have any other application?
No, not actually. Cha lo hi le
Okay.
dan chu i draw chang kha Hebrew base I draw chang wai la kha thei lo i chang mo wai ja class la chang pop wai kha ji thoi ji.
Our only problem is that we used to draw this diagram when we
Yeah.
take Bible classes.
Yeah.
So sometimes when we put this altar incense up here, according
Yeah.
to some person, this seems to be inside this most holy place.
So
We are a little confused.
I'll tell you what I think about that, and you need to completely discard this and check it yourself.
Okay.
I believe what he's saying is this sort of belongs to this
Yeah.
room, even though it is outside.
Yeah, that is what I
It's
do.
furniture that relates to that room, and think about it this way.
Yeah.
Here, when I again pen ka, a table ka here le mo, again nam ti sa ti pen ka, azat na ti pen ta ka sung piso hi.
What we're
Tung
told
lai chang mo.
What we're told happens is the priest can't go in there until he has enough incense to fill this room.
Here sem puti ka mo. Here gim lung toy lo wa ka. Here gim lima ka here adim ma ka lu thei lo chang mo. Agim lim pen bel here ong ngai so.
Yeah.
Ki le alu ti chang ka gim lim ka it was used inside this.
So if he walked in there to light it and get it going,
Yeah.
he would be in trouble. So even though this relates to this room, it's outside it because it's the way in.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He sunga sabdi de le om na pen bel he om te te ngai mo. Aja ka he sunga ka sem puten bahal nam lo dei chuma le. Ahal sa pen ka ama to lu ngai he. Yeah, that
But-
makes sense.
But you think about that. That's just what this guy thinks.
Mà khang tiếng anh tuan nào đấy không? Quay
This guy is not inspired.
Cái khát cũng tuan đâu đấy. I think it's clear.
And he's after time.
So cái đó.
I know, he's still talking.
He's still talking.
Leviticus vùng sâu na pen mai tam na da pe bur si na mun pe koi na
Dear brother, Leviticus chapter 10. Where did Nadab and Abihu die?
Where did they die?
Inside this holy place or most holy place or outside? Where did they die? Nadab and Abihu.
On the ark.
They died when they approached with strange fire and didn't treat him as holy. That's all I know.
And the next question regarding where do they took that incense? Where do they took that fire from? Some writers say that the incense and the fire should be taken from this place. Since they do not take the fire from this place, from other strength, from other place. Yeah.
You are going to hear me say repeatedly, I don't know for certain. When I teach Leviticus 10, 1 through 3, and the surrounding verses at home, I make this point that I'm about to say. I don't know what strange fire means. Strange simply means unauthorized there. Whether they were supposed to take the fire from here and used a big lighter instead, I don't know. Actually, I do. They didn't have a big lighter. But I don't know whether they took it from the wrong place, or whether they handled it improperly, or whether it was strange because they didn't involve themselves in the washings before they got there. All I need to know is what he says they died for.
เพราะอาศินาเสียขโมยทุบยักษ์เราว่าองเปลี่ยนมั้งทุบยักษ์องเขาเราเปลี่ยนนั่นจะกันพระผู้จังที่ให้กันเรียกองไปน่าเทกีละ
And what they died for was, it was strange, it wasn't recognized by God.
ให้เปลี่ยนครับประเทศนี้นาทีปีโลครับอาเหมั่วไม่รักเปลี่ยนครับ
And then the real reason is told to them in verse 3, because they didn't sanctify him when they came near.
อย่าให้อาศินาจะเป็นตะกุค่ะประเทศทุบีนาเปลี่ยนเราเสียคนเมื่อประเทศเสียงเท่านาเปลี่ยนให้บัวเสียคนจีเปลี่ยนให้
By doing something different, they didn't treat him as holy.
แค่เสียงเท่าด้านน่ะมั่วอากอยเราเสียกว่าเฮเสียงเท่าด้านน่ะอาโบเราเสียกว่าเสียงเท่าตะกาโบเราเสียกว่าใช่ไหมนี่
My personal judgment is we're not told exactly what they did wrong, because the Spirit didn't want people focusing on the exact thing that was done wrong.
เอ้ครับลายเสียงเท่าเสียงตะกาห้องหินหลอกน่าเสียขมั่วบางเสียงเป็นตะกาสีย่ำจีค่ะข้าเสียงเท่าหินห้องที่สมุนเราเสียคิดยังไง
The message was, treat him as holy. When you do something different, you're not treating him as holy.
เฮ้ยอาเกนเปลี่ยนตะโจประเทศจีเราด้านไหนโบเจียงเนี่ยนะประเทศข้าเสียงเท่าหนาเป็นเรามั่วประเทศข้าจะตักหนาเป็นเราจีห้องสินสับอุทิศยังไง
That may not satisfy you, but I think that's the real answer.
เราแต่นั่นลุงกิมน้ำบางต้องโดนเทกีได้ไงเนี่ยไว้เปลี่ยนข้าประเทศห้องนี้รู้เปลี่ยนไว้ตั้งเห็นแล้วยังไง
satisfied
I have one satisfied in the rear corner.
ได้ไหม